Hi everybody, welcome to Dram Daddy Whiskey. I'm Dan, and tonight we are trying a follow-up to one of my favorite new releases from last year. It was Hardin's Creek Jacob's Well, which in my opinion is one of the best beam products I've ever had. And their follow-up this year is actually the first part of a series of 3, but we're focusing today on the Hardin's Creek Clermont. There we are. Hardin's Creek is a new line released by Jim Beam starting last year that calls back to the origins of James Beam Distillery in Kentucky. When Johannes Jacob Beam started his homestead way back in the day, hundreds of years ago in Kentucky, the water source that fed their home, eventually their bourbon production, was Hardin's Creek. And this year we're getting a trio of releases instead of just one. Each of the 3 releases is meant to highlight a different facility at which Jim Beam distills their bourbon. Clermont, Frankfort, and Boston. And this first release is the one highlighting what I think is probably the most well-known of the Beam campuses, Clermont. Comes in a beautiful bottle, which I think is the same shape and design as last year. It's different without being gaudy. Got this neat little bolo right here. And it has the contraption on top that makes you second guess whether you actually want to have a pour, which is great. Let's open her up. So like the most recent aged release of Hardin's Creek, Jacob's Well, there was also a 2-year-old version that we don't talk about. But like Jacob's Well, this one is age stated in terms of months for some reason. In Jacob's Well, it made a little bit more sense because it was like an odd number of months. It didn't fall evenly on a year, but this one does. It's 204 months, which puts it at exactly 17 years. So the youngest bourbon in this bottle is 17 years old. It's pretty crazy. Jim Beam really releasing older stuff lately. Last year they had the Knob Creek 18. Now they come out with 110 proof. It's 110 proof, by the way. 17-year-old bourbon. That's rad. I really like Jacob's Well, so I'm really excited to try this. Let's give it a go. On the nose. It's definitely Beam without being nutty. What more can you ask for? Oh, you get oak, you get some dark ripe fruit. I can't really tell what exactly, but you get some rye spice, you get some spice, some tannins from that oak. Oh, and it's like a burnt brown sugar on there. I wouldn't say smoky exactly, it's the char. You definitely pick up on the char. Oh, it's wonderful. It's dark and rich and great. Excited to try this one, so let's do it. Wow, it's sweet and rich and dark, medium viscosity, but the finish is lasting so long. The oak lingers. Again, just like the nose, you get something that's quintessentially Jim Beam without being nutty. I don't know how that works. I've speculated in the past that I think the nuttiness is kind of imparted by the oak, in that as it ages more, the nuttiness fades away as the oak goes up. That seems to be holding true with this release. I don't get nuttiness at all from this, even though it does still taste like a Beam product, and it's fantastic. Second sip. So sweet up front, and on the sides. Develops into spicy, oaky, as you get to the mid palate in the back. It's like the broad strokes, I think, of what's happening on the palate, but there's more there. There's some kind of fruit, like dark cherries that are ripe, like muddled into maple syrup, maybe with a little bit of water, so it's not too tacky. And that's kind of like what this is. That oak is just perfect in here because you pick up on it, but it is not drying at all. It is just sweet and spicy in all the right ways. It's wonderful. Third sip. Yeah, it's that corn sweetness up front, but then it's like it's a wave crashing, and then when it crashes back, it's just oak. It's just oak and some fruit. And it is so good, that development, that change. If it was just the sweet corn throughout that you were picking up, that'd be fine. It'd be good still. But then it changing in that drastic way, just to be all oak and ripe red fruits, it's such a good transition, and it's a transition into such a good flavor. This is fantastic. I think I'm ready to give this a score. It's got everything that I like about bean products and nothing that I dislike about them. It's got the dark richness while maintaining sweetness. It's got fruit. That doesn't always happen, where you get these like ripe red fruit flavors in here, in this case cherry, the maple syrupiness that accompanies the oak, and the spice that accompanies the oak, and the tannins. It's everything I look for in a bean product. The score I'm going to give this whiskey, it's a 9.0. It is absolutely wonderful. So fantastic. I can't really knock anything about it. Could be a tiny bit more viscous. It could have a little bit more prevalent like oak in the finish as opposed to the sweetness from the corn, but I'm really nitpicking there. This is wonderful. It deserves a 9 in my book. I love it. And on to the grade, taking everything into account with this release, not just the whiskey in the bottle. It's hard to judge how hard it's going to be to find this. It is limited. It's going to be hard to find, but just how hard is tough to say because it just came out. It's a great proof. It's a fantastic whiskey. Hard to find, and it is expensive. I think I overpaid for mine. I think MSRP for this one comes in around like $180. I paid $200 before tax. Saw it, had to have it, didn't know if I'd see one again, you know? Didn't want that FOMO, but that's really expensive. On the other hand, it's hard to attack the price too much given what we're getting here. It's a 17-year-old bourbon that's probably not barrel proof, but pretty close to it, 110 proof. And it's fantastic. I don't know that I can knock it too much for the price, honestly. I shouldn't have paid the price I did at 200, but like at MSRP around like 180, I think that's about right, probably about fair. So the overall grade I give this release, Hardin's Creek Clermont from 2023, it's an A+. I can't knock it too much for price when it's ultra aged bourbon like this. And they knocked it out of the park. They did a fantastic job. If this ends up being completely impossible for folks to find, yeah, maybe knock that grade back to down like an A, but still, this is good stuff. It was a great release. But I would be remiss if I didn't compare this bourbon to its predecessor, Hardin's Creek Jacob's Well. So here we go. As I mentioned earlier, Jacob's Well comes in at 2 proof points lower, and I think it's around 14 years, 15 years, 184 months. So what is that, 20 months younger than that, so a year and a half younger. So yeah, like 15 years old. Jacob's Well on the nose. Huh. It's like less sweet, more spicy, I think. Yeah, Jacob's Well is maybe more spicy oak on the nose, whereas Clermont is like a sweet oak on the nose. That's probably the best way I could put it. Jacob's Well on the palate. So this one develops nicely, but it's a lot slower. So yeah, the sweetness up front is more prevalent, and it sounds so stupid to call a 15-year-old whiskey like younger, but it seems to taste a little bit younger at first because that corn sticks around a little bit longer, but then the oak comes in more of a nuanced way, I guess is a good way to put it. It's really balanced. It's incredible. I mean, I love this release, and I still do. You know, and there are more of the oaks coming through now from the beginning on that one. Okay, let's compare it to Clermont. Oh, so good on the nose. Wow. So the Clermont, there is more of the oak present throughout, you know, in comparing it to the Jacob's Well from the start. Makes sense, it's a little bit older, but man, that is so good. It's tough to really pick apart which one of these is better. One last time back to Jacob's Well. The main difference between these two, the main factor that differentiates them from each other is the presence of oak in Clermont throughout the sip, throughout the experience on your palate, as compared to the presence of oak in Jacob's Well, which seems to start more on the back palate and the finish. Particularly the finish is when it really comes through. I mean, as compared to Clermont. Like if I was going to compare Jacob's Well to any other whiskey on the market, pretty much it would be like an oak bomb. Don't get me wrong. But when we're talking about a 17-year-old bourbon against a 15-year-old bourbon, it is easier to notice that when you're comparing those two. Both fantastic, both wonderful. Buy them both if you can, if you find them. Get them both. They're fantastic. Don't pass them up. Jim Beam, you're doing a great job with this line. Please keep it up. If I could find Frankfort and Boston just to compare, I don't have to pay $200 each. You know, that might be kind of tough to get all three, but I really like to because so far so good with Hardin's Creek. Really love this stuff. Let us know if you do too. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment to let us know what you think about this if you're able to find it, if you have a different take on what the best bean product is. I can't imagine that's the case because this is so good, but maybe you do. And until next time, cheers.